Everyone, today we're going to go through the 5.6 Ready, Set, Go notes. And this section is actually going to be our last section for this school year. So we're going to start off with a little bit of a review and then relate it to what we've been doing with graphing inequalities. So the first thing that we need to be able to do, or really need to remember, is how to graph vertical and horizontal lines. And for this piece, when we're graphing lines, so actually let's just look at this first one. We're going to graph x equals 4. I think the best way to go about this is to make yourself a quick table. I saw a lot of you did this in the practice and it helped you get the correct lines. So when we have x equals 4, what that's telling us is the x coordinate of any point on that line is always going to be 4. And y could be whatever you want it to be. So it could be -5 and let's say -2 or 3. The y coordinate doesn't matter, only the x does. So then we can take this table and translate it into ordered pairs that we can graph to make our line. So now I'm going to have 4, -5, which means I go to the right 4 and down 5. I've got 4, -2 is going to be right here. And then 4, 3 is going to be here. Now, one thing I noticed on the summative is that a lot of people were drawing their points, but then forgetting to draw on the line. So don't forget, I actually need to see the graph of a line there when you're done. And so now we can see, just like we learned before, when we have x equals, that's going to be a vertical line. Now, on the other hand, here I have y equals 4. We can go about this the same way by making a table, but now the difference is it's my y coordinate that's always 4. And again, I could pick whatever I wanted to for x and then plot those points. So -1 up 4 would be there, 0, 4 would be here, 2, 4 would be there. And then, as always, I'm going to go ahead and connect those points with a straight line to get my line. And here, since it was y equals, I have a horizontal line. So now here you'll notice, right, we were back to just doing equations. So that's why we didn't have to worry about any of the shading or the dotted or solid lines. We're going to deal with that now because now we're going to be looking at inequalities again and not just equations. All right, so now we have things that look very similar, but now we see our inequality symbols. So for this first group, now I have x is less than 4. Well, we know what the line x equals 4 looks like because we just graphed that. But now here's where we have to remember what we learned about inequalities. If you'll remember, there were two decisions we had to make. One was about whether it was a dotted or a solid line, and one was about whether we shaded above or below. So let's think about this here. Since I have less than, I know that's going to be, not solid. Since it's just less than, that's going to be our dotted line. So the graph is going to look the same as x equals 4, right? I could plot those same points that I had above. Let's see. And 4, 3. But now I have to make that a dotted line. Now, here's the other difference. Before we always talked about or above or below where we were going to shade, but we really can't do that here because we have a vertical line. So with vertical lines, we want to think about whether we're shading to the left or to the right. And this is what we can use some information that we learned about how to graph inequalities on number lines. Since that's an arrow, we could think of this as an arrow pointing to the left. We're going to shade over here to the left side. So we're going to shade to the left. We're going to follow that arrow. Now, if I look at the next example, again, I notice I have a strictly greater than, so that's going to be dotted as well. So I can go, I know this is a vertical line that crosses the x-axis at 4. But now, since this is a greater sign, that arrow is pointing to the right, we're going to shade to the right. And it's going to look like this. Okay, now the next two examples are pretty straightforward. Here, since I have less than or equal to, now we're back to our solid line. So I'm going to go ahead and draw a straight line here. Vertical line that intersects the x-axis at 4. And again, I'm going to let kind of the direction of that symbol help me out here. This looks like an arrow that's pointing to the left, so I'm going to shade left. Everything over here to the left is going to get shaded in. And then over here, again, I've got greater than or equal to. That tells me I have a solid line. So I'm going to go ahead and draw in my solid line intersecting the x-axis at 4. I'm going to put my arrows on. And then for shading, it looks like that's an arrow pointing to the right, so we're going to go ahead and shade right. All right, so now the only thing left to look at is what happens with horizontal lines. And again, this is based off our equation y equals 4. So let's take a look here. First thing I notice is I have a strictly less than sign. So I know I'm going to have a dotted line. It's going to cross the y-axis where at 4. And now here, we can think of this like we did before. This less than symbol means I'm going to shade below. Now that this is a horizontal line, it makes sense to think of above or below. So less than, just like before, is going to tell us below the line. Okay, my next one, again, greater than. I don't have the or equal to, so this is going to be a dotted line as well. It's going to cross the y-axis at 4. But now we can see we've got our greater than symbol. That tells me I'm going to shade above, because this is where all the y values would be greater than 4. All right, at this point, it might not be a bad idea to pause the video and try the next two on your own. And then you can restart when you're done. All right, the idea here then, I've got now it's less than or equal to. So here we're back to our solid line. So now my line pretty much looks the same, except now I don't have to worry about doing the dotted line. I'm going to put my arrows here. I have less than or equal to. Less than tells me below. Right? My y values get smaller and smaller the further down I go. So I'm going to shade below. And last but not least, now I have y greater than or equal to 4. Greater than or equal to tells me again it's a solid line. So here is my solid line, crosses the y-axis at 4. I put my arrows on. And then my last step is always deciding where to shade. Since this is greater than or equal to, we're going to shade above. So again, this is really just using a lot of the ideas we learned about inequalities in general, but now applying them to vertical and horizontal lines. So on Wednesday, you'll get your last Ready, Set, Go assignment, and it'll be graphing all inequalities with some of these verticals and horizontal lines mixed in. All right, hopefully that made sense. As always, please reach out if you have any questions. Thank you.